Hello world and welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. I did it! I completed the owls! It was touch and go there for a little while. I wasn't sure if I was gonna make it. There were DNFs, there were 5 stars, there were changes. I even decided to take on a career training. Let's talk. I'm gonna go through all of the books in the exact same order that I did for the TBR. If you haven't watched that, go ahead and check it out to see where this all started. The career that I selected for the owls was Potioneer, which had 5 requirements, beginning with Arithmancy, which is a book outside of your favorite genre. My genre is science fiction, so I selected Parenting Beyond Pink and Blue by Christia Brown, which is a non-fiction parenting guide to raising children without gendered stereotypes. This was a DNF. This is hot, sweaty garbage. Okay, this book is the one that came up in Google searches and personal recommendations from friends when my spouse and I were thinking and discussing the idea of raising our child without assigning a gender to them based on their anatomy, which is also called gender neutral or gender creative parenting. Basically, it's the idea that your sex does not determine your gender identity. Groundbreaking. This book, like I said, is the one that comes up when you're throwing that idea out there into the ether. This book is garbage. Nowhere in the chunk of this that I read does Brown even once use or acknowledge gender-neutral pronouns. It is all boy, girl, he, she, taking gender as this immutable fact that cannot and does not change and is determined solely by your anatomy. At multiple points throughout the chunk of this that I read, gender is used to describe sex. There is no differentiation between the two at any point. This book also references a well-known case, I guess, of a Canadian family that made headlines by the radical decision not to reveal the sex of their child, which was really just they weren't going to assign a gender identity to their child based on their child's anatomy, and this made headlines. I'll leave the information in the description, but it was a whole thing in the early mid-2010s that was referenced here, but at no point does Brown use they for the child, only refers to the child by their name, Storm. And Brown makes the argument that this is a really courageous and it's a really good fight that this family decided to take on, but it's not one that she would feel comfortable with for her own family because she doesn't want her children to be bullied. She doesn't want her babies to be relegated to wearing burlap sacks as the obvious only gender-neutral choice of clothing, and to go by the pronoun it. So instead, I decided to go with a contemporary novel, and I read I Wish You All the Best by, oh crap, Mason Deaver. It's Mason Deaver, that is their name. Like I said, it's a contemporary, it's a romance, it's focused very heavily on personal identity and coming into yourself and accepting who you are. I'm gonna go ahead and link a really excellent review and explanation of this book by a non-binary YouTuber, Adriana of Perpetual Pages, I think is their channel. So go ahead and check out their video. This was 5 stars, quite obviously. It's great. Next up is Care of Magical Creatures, which is a book that has a beaked creature on the cover. There's no non-awkward way to say that sentence. For this, I selected Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. So, this was 3 stars. I have tried to read this before and I gave up on it because I didn't like the characters or the story all that much. And being honest, I'm not super into it still, but I liked it a lot more than I did the first time I tried to read it. The first time around, I was really stuck on how, not like other girls, Blue is coded. Like, she never says those words, but she's very much coded that way. I wasn't comfortable with it, and like how she doesn't have kind of any friends, or that's the way it's described, and then she just falls into this group of rich boys. They're not all rich, but it felt really weird to me. This time around, I was able to appreciate that she actually calls them out on their shit a lot and like has a lot of really good comebacks. It was a more enjoyable dynamic that she had with the other characters, and I liked that. One major contributing factor that I think led to my enjoying this much more than I did the first time I tried to read it was the book I finished immediately before starting this was Ninth House, which we'll talk about eventually this year. All I will say for now is it was 5 stars, and it definitely had me in a mental headspace of ghosts, so I was able to better appreciate Raven Boys. Am I going to continue with the series? I'm not against it, which is definitely a change for me, but I'm not seeking it out. Next up is Charmed, which is a book with a white cover. For this, I selected Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is a book that I had started previously, so I had a head start on it. Enjoying it a lot. I find the magic system and the culture that was playing into it fascinating, and the reason that it was sitting at a 4 stars for most of the read was I didn't feel like it was giving me enough of that magic system and that culture. It was giving a lot of relationships and interpersonal relationship drama, and that's fine. That's not bad, but that's not what I was interested in. And then the climax of the book happened. Everything that I could possibly want happened at the end of that book, and it was 5 stars. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. Amari. Then for Herbology, this is a book whose title starts with an M. I selected Mouseheart by Lisa Fiedler. This is a book that I wanted to read because I own the sequel, so I wanted to read the first one to get to the sequel. This was a DNF. I got a little over halfway through and I just could not stomach this anymore. Everything that this book tries to do has been done better. You want a chosen one story, you want a middle grade adventure story, you want talking animals, specifically mice and or rats. I can give you examples that have all been done better than this. It was not good. Leans very heavily into and relies very heavily on toxic masculinity and toxic gender stereotypes and gender dynamics, which for a story about mice is impressive, but there it is. Basically, you have your main character and he has a relationship with his sister where she is very nasty to him. In the half of the book that I read, you don't hear the words like man up or be a man or anything directly in that vein, but that's very much the sentiment that the sister projects. The protagonist feels a lot of shame and guilt for not exhibiting more traditionally masculine characteristics. He is not very brave. He feels that he is cowardly. He doesn't protect his family in the ways that he feels he should. Whereas his sister does exhibit these characteristics. She is very aggressive. She's very quick to anger. She's very quick to fighting with others. She uses a lot of very bullying language against her brother. She calls him cowardly, calls him weak. Like I said, this is also a chosen one narrative. There is a prophecy, and based on the sister's physical and personality traits, she is assumed to be the chosen one in this prophecy until they discover that she has a brother. The brother gets introduced and they immediately say, oh, actually he's the chosen one because he's a boy, and there is no other reasoning behind that decision other than the prophecy specifies a masculine pronoun. And that was the point at which I just said, no, I can't read the rest of this. I'm not wasting my time on this. So instead, I switched over to a book for my TBR called Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. I have so many things to say about this. I'll start with telling you that it was 1 star, okay? Let's start there. This was a ride because for whatever reason, I was under the impression that this is a middle grade, kind of a spooky Scooby-Doo type of deal. It's not. This is an adult book. Best way I can describe this is eldritch humor. I'm gonna be completely upfront and honest. I enjoyed the experience of reading this book a lot. It's, like I said, it's humor. And while I don't typically seek out comedies, I don't tend to like them. This humor style worked very well for me. The humor style is very dark and somewhat absurdist and almost satirical. It reminded me a lot of Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead. It's that style of humor, and I like that style of humor a lot, so I enjoyed that aspect of it. The parts of this book that are eldritch horror are very well done. The descriptions of the atmosphere and the locations and the monsters are really terrifying and vivid and mysterious. I don't think mysterious is the word that I wanted, but I have a very clear mental image of what these monsters are like, and I could not for the life of me try and describe them to you. That's sort of the balance that eldritch horror tries to strike in creating these really horrific, unknowable, ununderstandable abominations, and Quintero did that very, very well. The reason that this is a 1 star, and I do not recommend this for anyone to read, is it relies very heavily on some really problematic language and negative stereotyping. This book is incredibly lesbophobic, transphobic, appropriation of indigenous cultures and mythologies. It's a big old yikes. I will link to a really helpful blog post that articulates and unpacks a lot of the things that I was struggling with. Like I said, I did enjoy the humor of it and the process of going through the story. I didn't hate it. I just was left with this feeling of there are parts of this that I enjoyed a lot, and I can't recommend it to absolutely anyone because it's heavily problematic. And next up is Potions, which is a book under 150 pages. I had planned to read In the Shadow of Spindrift House by Sean McGuire under the Mira Grant pen name, but this is where I had my first change up. I actually got access to my first choice from my library. I put a hold on this book and I didn't think that it was going to come through because this is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. It is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. If I try and talk about this book, I'm going to start screaming and or crying. So let us say it was 5 stars. I have purchased a physical copy of this book, all of the other books in the series, and I have pre-ordered the next one, which will be published next month. That is how unbelievably excellent this book was. All Systems Red follows Murderbot, the chosen name of our point of view character, who is a mechanical construct. They are designed and produced by this big company that manufactures construct beings for specific purposes. Murderbot is a security unit, so they are contracted out through their literal and figurative parent company to serve as security on various space missions. This particular one is following a crew doing surveying on a unoccupied planet, just figuring out like what the deal is on this planet, what resources are here, how valuable is it, that type of deal. Murderbot at some point in their life hacked their control modules, so they are no longer under the control of their parent company. They have free will. They are sort of flying under the radar, following their contracts so that they are not discovered by the company or others. And they're pretty much okay with this existence because they've spent the majority of their freedom watching television shows. And they would really like nothing better than to stay in their closet and watch television shows. And they talk at length throughout the book about their desire to do the absolute least amount of work necessary to maintain their job and their cover, because they don't want to do any work. They just want to sit in their bunk and watch TV shows all day and night. I have never related to a character as strongly as I relate to Murderbot. Murderbot is precious. I cannot wait to read the rest of this series. I will be such a proud owner of these books when they arrive. Please go read The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. And like I said, I read 2 books for Potions, so I did end up reading In the Shadow of Spindrift House by Sean McGuire. I read All Systems Red first, and then I got to the end of Meddling Kids and I was in such a bad state that I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and read Spindrift House because I know now that this is eldritch in some fashion and I need something that's not this. In the Shadow of Spindrift House is a short story. It's not humorous, it's straight up eldritch horror. It's so well done. It's really beautiful. It's particularly fascinating in a direct comparison to Meddling Kids because both stories follow a female protagonist who is a lesbian and is in love with a fellow member of their childhood friend group, which is this like Scooby-Doo mystery solving group of kids who have since grown up and are trying to acclimate to adult life in the real world. Where this diverges, Spindrift House is just a straight eldritch horror story. It is the descent into madness. I don't think that I would recommend this as an introduction to eldritch horror, only because there's a lot of very specific references that I understand because I'm familiar with eldritch horror. I don't know if someone who doesn't have any familiarity with eldritch horror would be able to enjoy this necessarily. I'm not saying you wouldn't enjoy it, but I can't make a guarantee about it because to me it does rely on some background knowledge of eldritch horror. That said, this was still a 5-star read. I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to read it, and because I had read 2 books for potions and I was actually able to finish Children of Blood and Bone, that was the last book that I read for Potioneer, I went looking through career trainings that were available in the careers guide and decided on Animagus? The one where you can turn yourself into an animal. It's shapeshifter training. And I decided to tack that one on, which requires an additional arithmancy book and a transfiguration book, which I didn't have. Transfiguration being a book that contains shapeshifting in some way. For arithmancy, I went ahead and read a manga that I was toying with reading next month for 2020 Asian Readathon, which we will talk about next week. Look forward to that. I decided to just go ahead and read it early. This is volume 9 of Genshiken. Oh, I don't remember the author of Genshiken. I'll put that on the screen. This is a contemporary manga following a group of college kids who are in a social club together. That was a really awkward way of describing that. It's a college club for otaku. They go to conventions and they make models together and they're friends and hang out and do all kinds of fun nerdy stuff. I love the series. As a series as a whole, it's 5 stars for me. I absolutely adore it. And for Transfiguration, I decided to read Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which has been on my TBR for a while. It's not short enough to qualify for potions, but it's about the audiobook is about 6.5 hours long, so I felt confident that I could complete it in April. That's everything! I did it! I passed the owls! I am on my way to being a potions master. Yes. So excited. I never thought that I would be here. I really, really didn't think that I was gonna be able to finish it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments what your experience has been, owls, if you are participating, or if you are, not someone that participates in readathons, just let me know that down in the comments because I certainly never thought that I would be here. I think that's everything. Like I said, stay tuned next week for my TBR for the 2020 Asian Readathon hosted by Read with Cindy. I hope that you are all safe and healthy. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you all later.